a really warm introduction and good introduction, and thank you for that. And today, as we all know, we are going to talk about trauma. So there's a lot of hype about this word trauma, trauma, trauma. Everybody is talking about trauma. You pick up social media and you see so many things about trauma, whether it is being trauma-informed care, trauma bonding, trauma response, how to come out of trauma, somatic exercises. There's a lot and lots of trauma information available on social media. One gets confused. What actually is trauma and why are we talking about trauma suddenly, especially during pandemic? After the pandemic, we have realized everybody is talking about trauma. More per se, when we were talking about mental health, trauma is something which is coming to the surface more so. So today, we have dedicated this one full day to trauma and also learning about how to be trauma-informed, how to introduce trauma-informed care to our well-being and also bringing it to our relationships and helping others. So today I'll be showing up some slides and I'll be talking about trauma, explaining trauma to all of you. Just give me a second, I'll share my screen. Is my screen visible? Okay. So we are talking about trauma, as I mentioned to you, and I am a trauma-informed EMDR therapist. I also do TRE. I'm a certified brain spotter, and I also use somatic experiencing in my practice with my clients. Ground rules, as Karan earlier shared, which is if you feel triggered by the content, please feel free to step away. It is important that you attend to yourself first. We assume that you all have enough support and resources to self-regulate. If there are any questions, please use the Zoom functionality, use chat box, and remember that no question is bad question. So symptoms of trauma, I want to start from this actually. Symptoms of trauma. What are some of the symptoms of trauma that we see? It's very obvious when we can see and observe the trauma symptoms, which are like nightmares, flashbacks, person is avoiding, is fearful, having panic attacks, mood fluctuations. But there is another set of trauma symptoms which we don't see, which are like some thoughts of not being able to trust someone, thoughts of abandonment, thoughts of feeling shame. I'm the one who is to be blamed. Everything is happening because of me. Always having a feeling that somebody is going to cheat on me or people are dishonest with me. Life is not easy for me. So there's a constant feeling, there are constant persistent thoughts, and not just thoughts, there are sensations. There are sensations like knot in my stomach, there's heaviness in my shoulder, or I'm developing cold feet. These are some of the trauma symptoms that we don't even see and we don't even recognize. We feel, okay, maybe that's part and parcel of my life and that is something I have to live with, or I'm being threatened by this project meeting, or I'm being threatened by this deadline, and that's why my body is reacting, and we don't attend to those, but sometimes they are trauma symptoms. So I really want to make the distinction at the start itself that there are trauma symptoms which are observable to our eyes, and there are trauma symptoms which are not observable to our eyes. So with that, I also want to say, do you or someone you know experience one of these on a regular basis? Overanalyzing, over-explaining ourselves, over-apologizing or avoiding feelings, perfectionism, workaholism, being a micromanager, checking every minute details, inability to say no, and we keep on saying yes, keep on taking more and more on our plate, whether we have the capacity and the bandwidth to do it. Muscular tensions. Have you ever observed, your jaw holding back tightly, even though there's nothing happening and there is no imminent threat, but the jaw is holding a lot of tension? Anger, guilt, inner critic. I want you to take a moment to ask yourself whether you or someone you know experience these symptoms on a regular basis. If possible, take a screenshot for later reference also, because this is going to help us. So there is no such thing as overreacting. If you watch this cartoon, there's this heart who's walking with past trauma, a burden of past trauma, and you add on to that stress, add on to that past trauma, some pandemic, some bad news, some problems in job, problems in relationships, and there comes a minor inconvenience, and the heart is there. It goes haywire. It just cracks open, and there's million to pieces of it. And then somebody who watches it, he says, "Hey, but that was a minor inconvenience. I think you are overreacting." But we have to understand, is the person, or if I'm talking about myself, am I really overreacting, or I have been holding it for so long that I'm not able to carry it anymore, and that minor inconvenience irked me in a level which nobody could have ever imagined. And then this overreaction, over exaggeration, uh, there's a minor incident and I may react in a way which is like over, and everybody's like, why you're getting bothered by this small thing. So that is something which actually gives us some understanding that this person is getting triggered, and that trigger actually becomes the portal of our healing also. Because I'll just give you an example. Of course I'm getting triggered. Somebody is pulling that trigger or pushing that trigger, but there is ammunition within me, right? There is something within me which is also getting triggered. I cannot do anything about the person who's holding the trigger or who's pushing the trigger, but there is something in me which is getting triggered, that ammunition, that material which is ready to catch fire. I can attend to it. I can diffuse it. So that's what is in my control. There's something which I can do. So I want to bring your awareness. Yes, trauma is there. Yes, trauma is pervasive. Yes, trauma is part of our lives, but it's always possible to heal from trauma. So what is trauma? So, if I go outside, I ask anybody what is trauma, very, very, very common definition is, any big car accident, being involved in any natural calamity, natural disaster, rape, or something big. Whenever it comes to trauma, it's like a big word in our psyche. We only think about trauma in those terms. We rarely think about trauma in relational terms. When we say relation, especially in Southeast Asian culture, we are relationally, we get relationally hurt. We are relational beings, whether Southeast Asia or all over the world. We are relational beings. We get hurt in relationships. We heal in relationships. So when we talk about trauma, the aspect which we are going to focus today is relational aspect of trauma, and how trauma has that relational piece which may create some woundedness in us, some pain in us, and whether we realize it or not, it is our woundedness, or how we cope with that woundedness that dictates much of our behavior, our social habits, and informs our way of thinking. So we call it big T and small t trauma. When I say big T, obviously natural calamities, accidents, wars, that is big T. It's obviously big trauma. The small t trauma, when we talk about relational trauma, it's called small t trauma. And it could be something as, in clinical language, we call it adverse childhood experiences, wherein a child has experienced some kind of adversities during growing up years that has resulted in some kind of trauma symptoms in child's nervous system. I'll give you an example. If there is a dysfunctional family, parents are getting divorced, or somebody in the family is going through mental illness, or there is physical or emotional neglect by the parents. It could be any reason, maybe the parent is too busy fetching food for the family, or the parent is emotionally not available to the child. It could also be abuse, and that abuse could be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. So if a child has gone through all these kinds of trauma, that is counted as relational trauma, and we call it small t trauma. And you will be amazed to know that today, at this point in time, it's not just adverse childhood experiences we are talking about. We are also talking about adverse baby experiences. So if a baby is also experiencing adversities, maybe lack of food, lack of nourishment, lack of safety, that is also imprinted in the body as trauma. We are also talking about in utero trauma. So what happens when mother is carrying a child? What is the environment inside the womb of a mother? Is the mother anxious? Is the mother stressed? That also has an impact on trauma imprinting of a child. And here I want to address, it's not about what happens in the family. There's certain things which happens outside the family of a child, which could be bullying, that also constitutes as small t trauma. Because I'll give you an example. There was recently a client of mine who moved from international school to a local school, and she was somehow rejected by the local kids there, and she was not accepted as she hoped. There was an expectation, when I'll go to the new school, people would accept me, but there was bullying. She was alienated. When these people rejected her, the poor child didn't think that there is something wrong with the kids or kids are being mean. She thought that there's something wrong with me, and she internalized it. So initially, those kids, that set of friends, rejected her, and later on, the poor child started rejecting herself. She thought there's something wrong with me. She started doubting her capacity. Her grades dropped. She was not as confident as she should have been. And she was a brilliant child. So these are the small, the small intricacies of trauma, because we have to embrace our humanity. We have to embrace the pain. We have to be, we are wired for connections. We are wired for love. We are wired for nurturance. We are wired for safety. If that is denied to us, that also amounts to trauma. I want you to see this video so that I make my point even more clearer. This is a video, this was a social circle, step inside the circle. This was an experiment done by Compassionate Prison Project, wherein this has been done with the inmates in the jail. And I'll just stop here because I want you to watch this now.
It's time now, everyone. We're gonna do the Compassion Trauma Circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or threw something at you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, step inside the circle. If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
There is no shame. There is no shame. There is no shame.
So that brings us to the emotional perspective. You already watched how childhood plays a role, whatever environment a child gets in the childhood during the growing up years can have a profound impact on the mental health, how that person perceives himself and world around him that would shape the personality. So that is why, this learning about small t traumas, relational trauma is extremely, extremely important. Today, I'm going to define trauma in two perspectives. First one is emotional perspective, which says trauma is not just the presence of bad things, but absence of good things which should have happened but didn't happen. I'll give you an example. If I were to ask all of you, just take a moment and close your eyes. Maybe you don't remember anything from when you were a 1 year old, but if you could imagine yourself, crawling on the kitchen floor, and you go and open the wardrobe or open the cabinet, and you take out the drum of flour, and you spill all the flour on the floor, and you're playing in it. You're having a good time. And then there comes your mom. What comes to you? Is she like, hey, what did you do? You've created mess for me. Or, oh my God, this is my baby who's trying to explore. I'm sure most of us fall in the first category. Me too. My mom would have been, really, really angry with me. Why the hell you are doing this? You're increasing my work. But those are the fine moments when our personality is being shaped with all good intention. Our parents are there for us, were there for us, and they tried their best with the stresses they were facing and the trauma they had in their lives and the baggage they were carrying. But for each one of us, absence of good things which should have happened, the nurturance, the safety, the love, the connection, the belongingness, the value, my worthiness, gets shaped in those moments when love is absent, when connection is absent, when nurturance is absent. So trauma is not just the presence of bad things, but absence of all the good things which a child needs, craves for its thriving are missing. Trauma is also not an event, any event that happened when my teacher actually pointed out to me in the class, but it is what happens inside me as a result of the event. So for two people, if they're getting divorced, one may feel like killing himself, and the other may go on, and start the life afresh with someone else. So the incident is same, the event is same, but how I'm taking it, what is happening inside me as a result of the event which is happening outside me is trauma. Feeling alone in my pain, when I do not get a corrective closure. For all the incidents, there is a start, there is a middle, and there is an ending. If I do not get a corrective closure, if my mom says, hey, I love you even if you don't get good marks, I know you tried hard, I know you worked hard, even if you didn't get good marks in PSLE, you're still my child, and I love you and I value you. I feel supported, I feel loved. But if I am left to feel alone in pain, and there is no corrective closure, I'm reminded of a girl who is not a girl, actually, one of my clients, she's in her 30s, all confidentiality maintained. I'm not going to share any of the names with you. So she had a sexual abuse when she was in secondary school. And the poor child, when she came home, she told mom, this happened. And she was devastated. And mom said, I knew it beforehand. This is going to happen because you are like that. You are like that. And that poor girl, she held on to that shame. Today, she is 35. She's on antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication. She's not able to overcome that shame. She's not able to go and fend for herself. She's not able to find a suitable job where there is customer interaction. She wants to hide behind the screen or hide behind the files because she's not able to face the world. Had it been a proper closure, had it been mom, being supportive, that pain gets reduced. We cannot change the event, but we can bring corrective closures. So that is extremely important. So when we talk about the emotional perspective, if I'm left to feel alone and there is no empathetic witness to help me come to a corrective closure, I would be traumatized. And the last one is authenticity versus attachment. So as I mentioned earlier, when I talk about attachment, it's like we all are wired for connection. I have that need to be loved, to love, and to have that feeling of belongingness. And that's my innate tendency. Everyone is wired like that by the universe. We have the tendency to get attached. And when we talk about authenticity, it's like who I am. It's that permission to express myself. But if I'm not able to express myself, it's attunement to my own body too. Authenticity is attunement to my own gut, to my own body. Think about if we were in wild and we didn't have that connection to our gut and intuition, we would have been long gone. We wouldn't have survived. So that helped us survive. That expression, that connection with our body, that authenticity helped us survive. But if for some reason I'm not allowed to express, if for some reason I'm not allowed to feel what I am feeling as a child, because either it is too much for my parents to handle, or my parents don't know how to do it, don't know how to support me. They just ask me, oh, he's throwing tantrum, take the mobile phone and just go there. Or they give me a time off. They ask me to just go out of the room, or I'm being punished for being expressive. See, a 3-year-old is going to be 3-year-old. Why am I dropping down to a level of 3-year-old? So something in me is also getting triggered, right? So authenticity, as a child, if I have traded my authenticity for attachment because I cannot live without my parents, so I better not express myself. If I express myself, the love is withdrawn. Parents are not closer to me. They don't love me anymore. And I'm a bad child. I feel bad about myself. So I rather repress my authenticity and stay connected to my parents. So I trade in that. And when I do trading like that, and suppose that that person grows up to be a 35-year-old, 40-year-old man, you ask them, how are you feeling? And they'll say, I don't know. I don't know. Because all these years, they have suppressed those feelings, because healthy expression or whatever expression of those feelings was either denied or repressed. So whenever there is a trade of attachment with authenticity, and there is not a fine balance between that, there comes a trauma in the system. And that's the emotional perspective of trauma. Before I move on to the next segment, I also want to tell you what are trauma responses. So whenever we are attacked, I'm using this analogy, whenever we are attacked by a tiger, the first instinct is running from the tiger. So just reverse the sequence. The first one is running from the tiger. If I see a tiger in the wild, I want to run away from the tiger. But if tiger somehow catch holds of me, I want to fight, even though I know I do not have the strength to fight a tiger, but I will try. Why not? I want to save myself. So I will fight. So first I will want to run away from there, then I would want to fight. But for some reason, if I am not able to get away from tiger and the tiger's teeth are in my skin, my body would freeze. And it may also go into collapse state, because my body starts to release opioids for easy death. Okay, now there is no scope, Navroop, you're going to die. So you better start releasing opioids so you have an easy death. So there comes freeze, there comes numbing. And in modern society, we have another F, which is fawn. Convince the tiger not to eat you. And in modern terminology, in our social life, we call it people pleasing. We become people pleasers. I'll do everything you say. I'll say yes to everything, but don't eat me. It's not that the tiger is eating you. My body is threatened by someone. I am invoking, my responses are like that. So anything that feels same, sounds same, invokes same kind of responses from my body. So if I have something encoded in my body in the childhood wherein I didn't have the capacity to react or retaliate towards my parents, I had the tendency to freeze. I'll stay quiet. I'll be like this all the time, hiding my emotions. So I'll freeze. And as I grow up, I'll tend to freeze every situation. Now the situation is not with my dad, but with my boss. So boss gives me a project, and if I'm not able to do it, I freeze. And if I give you an example of childhood, if there is domestic violence, And the child has a tendency to freeze, hide away from father. Every time a father comes to the room or to the house, children hide away or they start reading their books. Dad is going to see, Papa is going to ask us, where is the homework? What did you do during the day? Now you imagine in the wild, if the tiger comes back every day to eat you, what kind of stress response you will have. And now it's not the tiger, but threat is in the form of daddy, who is coming home every night and is going to beat up mommy or is going to beat me up. That's where it gets stored in my body. So today when I go to office and anything of my boss that reminds me of my daddy in some way, because trauma memories don't have date stamped to it, they are not stored like that in our memory. They are stored in our senses. Issue is in our tissues. It's stored, it's imprinted in our bodies. We do not remember it linguistically. We do not remember the language. That is the reason we may not know the stories. You ask me what happened to you. I don't know, but I know how I felt in that space. So the feeling would stay with us always. So it's so important to remember these trauma responses before I go further, which is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So coming to the nervous system perspective of what trauma is, it is an incomplete survival response. So as I explained to you, there is a fight response, there is a flight response, but somehow if that response is aborted in some way, I was not allowed to complete that response. I want to fight the tiger, but I know I can't fight the tiger. So there is a muscle tension in my body. Stress hormones are being released. Adrenaline is rushing in. My body is preparing for it, but they are not getting released out of my system. So there is an incomplete survival response. The response was basically to protect me, to help me survive. But because it was not allowed to complete, it gets stored in my system as trauma. We are either stuck in hypoarousal or hyperarousal. So either I'm always in fight mode or I'm always in freeze mode. I want to explain to you this via this. Our nervous system has a capacity to constantly charge, discharge, charge, discharge. Pulsation is the rhythm of life. Our heart is beating. We have pulse. You can feel your pulse. So we have pulsations in our body all the time. But if we get stuck here or here, either in expansion, we call it maniac, or in contraction, we call it depression. If my system is getting stuck in that hypoarousal or hyperarousal and is not, in that wave of charge, discharge, then I'm not in that normal window of tolerance, not in that normal nervous system response. And when I get stuck in either one of those, there is trauma in my body. Anything that exceeds nervous system's capacity to cope, okay, I do not even have the capacity to cope with it. My nervous system do not have the ability, do not have the resources internally. I'm not strong enough, or externally, wherein I have a safe person who I can go and talk to. Hey, grandmom, this is what is happening with me. Can you help me? Can I come and sleep at your house today? Can you help me with this? Dad is very angry today. There is no safety. So when it exceeds my nervous system's capacity to cope, it gets stored in my body as trauma. There is an element of suppression and oppression. As I've explained it earlier, if I'm not able to express myself authentically, it gets stored in my body as trauma. So it's either too much, too fast, like accident, like catastrophe, like natural disaster, like abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, too much, too fast. Or it is too less for too long. If I'm denied love for too long, for years, I'm craving for it. And I've craved for it so much that I've even stopped asking for it. I don't even know now even to articulate, how to articulate to even ask for that love. And there is this pain. And then I don't know how to address that pain, but there is this pain. I may not have words for that pain, but I know I have pain. So effects of trauma varies despite of some patterns and similarities. You may see some similarities, okay, my trauma is like this and other person's trauma is like this. So we can have some patterns or similarities, but everybody's trauma is different and it varies from person to person. There is no comparison of trauma, one person's trauma to another trauma. Pain is pain. Pain is pain. There is no, I cannot say, oh, your pain is more than mine or my pain is more than yours. There is no comparison between pain. It is a subjective experience of objective reality. As I mentioned earlier, if the reality is same, that the incident is same, but how am I experiencing it in my system? That is how trauma is stored in my body. That's the effect trauma has on me. And each experience makes sense. Each experience makes sense. So if we continue to label, oh, this is depression, this is maniac, this is borderline personality disorder, this is autism, this is ADHD, if we continue to label, Band-Aid, put a Band-Aid, just keep quiet, do something about it, go for a run, hold ice cubes only. These are just Band-Aids. If we do not address the root cause and shame ourselves for what we are experiencing, we stay in hiding, we will not heal and the state of the world will not change. So why talk about trauma? Navroop, you have explained everything about trauma, but now why talk about trauma? Because it's not neat and tidy. It doesn't come with a bow and a proper gift wrap, and you don't know how to articulate it. Words fail you, but pain won't fail you. You have that pain, and that pain needs to be addressed. We need to embrace humanity. Just because I'm a therapist, I'm not immune from trauma. Just because I have some experience, some clinical knowledge about it, that doesn't immune me from having any kind of pain. I would also experience pain. So if I talk about trauma, I embrace common humanity between you and me, the common thread that holds us together. And then I can come from a compassionate space, not just for my clients, not just for people in my life, in my relationships, but also for myself. And I'm not going to beat myself. We call it inner critic. I'm going to be compassionate towards myself as in the same way as I'm compassionate towards my relationships. To prevent misdiagnosis, oh my God, I have so many people coming to me whose trauma symptoms are not being identified and they're constantly being misdiagnosed for ADD, bipolar disorders, and specifically in children. Children are, labeled as troubled children without checking on whether they have any adverse childhood experiences. What were the circumstances like when the child was an infant, or what was mother going through? What was the circumstances of the house? What was the stress level of the mother when the child was in the womb? So it's extremely important to consider that and, establish that link and help address that pain. Because if we don't address that pain, we're just putting the Band-Aid again and again and again. So we want to prevent that misdiagnosis, because one day you go to psychiatrist and you are handed over a diagnosis of depression, another day a borderline personality disorder, other day you get another diagnosis. So you just keep on moving from a diagnosis to diagnosis, but we are human beings. We are beyond labels. And to provide proper line of treatment intervention, because we need to have the proper line of treatment if we know the root cause. If we do not even know the root cause, we are just trying to, try its test and trial. We are not machinery. We are not guinea pigs. This is real. The pain is real. So to provide proper line of treatment, to provide proper line of interventions, to address the root cause. If you want to change the fruit, we have to change the root. So to address the root cause, talking about trauma is extremely important. And again, we are not managing symptoms. We have to go to change management. Change management should be our objective when talking about trauma, when addressing trauma, when talking about interventions about trauma. Trauma-informed care is all about bringing a bigger change, the macro change and the micro changes, and not just symptom management. It's not like popping a Panadol whenever I'm having headache. If my headache is coming every day, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, I would wonder what's going on. I need to show it to the doctor because I need to address why this headache keeps coming back to me. Why am I getting triggered emotionally with everything? There is something happening within me which needs some kind of addressal in terms of professional support, in terms of safety, in terms of connection. So we also need to talk about trauma to create trauma-informed systems. Starting from trauma-informed individuals, it starts with me. Wounded people wound other people. If I do not address my own trauma, I'm going to bleed on other people. So I have to take care of myself to show up in the best possible way for others, for my relationships, and for my own well-being. And it's time for trauma work to become mainstream, be it schools, be it colleges, be it workspaces. We have to have that compassionate heart space and come from there to address trauma. And also, we talk about trauma to encourage healing, to inculcate hope in people that trauma imprint is not a death sentence. It can be healed. Hope is real. Nervous system can be shaped and reshaped via new experiences. Because your nervous system was shaped in childhood in a certain way because of the experiences you had, and now we can change those experiences in order to reshape your nervous system. So neuropsychotherapy takes away the shame and prevents re-traumatization. I want to take a minute to explain what neuropsychotherapy is. So it's like neurological. We're talking about the brain here. So our brain and body connections. So brain-based modalities, brain-body modalities, which takes into account what happens in the brain and the connection between your brain, your mind, your body, your gut, your psyche, your emotions. They all are interrelated. So we use those intertwined science-based psychotherapy techniques to help prevent shame. These psychotherapy techniques are so good that at times you do not even have to go into the content. If there is shame, or you feel like, oh my God, I have to go through my story again to this therapist and I have to talk about it, we can still work with that pain without getting re-traumatized because you do not have to share the content. So neuropsychotherapy allows that safety, that safe space to our clients to actually heal without sharing their story, without sharing the content. It's different from normal talk therapy. I'm not undermining talk therapy. It's extremely important. It's so important because it brings you to the awareness. It helps you to join the dots. It helps you to come to a level where you understand and where you are aware of the trauma and where we also accept. So it helps us to come to the level where we have the acceptance for the trauma. But beyond that, for healing, we need body-based modalities also, because trauma is stored as sensations. It is not stored as language in my system. So issue is in the tissues. Trauma is largely unconscious, non-verbal and felt. It is present as sensations, emotions, and patterns. Trauma and psychopathology. I know I'm going overboard. So, okay, so I'll be quick now. So trauma and psychopathology. So these are the symptoms which show up. Psychosomatic symptoms means which show up in the body, beliefs about self, beliefs about the world is not safe, people are not good, people are after me, they are going to rob me, they are going to cheat me. And sometimes, even the fear of goodness, if goodness happens in my life, I'm not able to take it. That's the sad story, isn't it? We are not able to take it. We are not able to accept it because that's so unfamiliar. I'm so familiar with the drama, with the pain. So if happiness comes in my life, I'm always scared that something is going to go wrong now. After this, it's not going to last. It's not going to last. So that feeling is always lingering in my mind and heart. So that's the sad part of trauma, how it shows up. Then it affects our close relationships, how I show up with my spouse, with my kids, in my office, my career, and also my finances, whether I feel that I can achieve something with my finances, or whether how I deal with my finances. What is the relationship I have with money would also, have a base in trauma. It's like, trauma is the strength. It's like you're viewing the present from a lens of past. You're wearing the red goggles and red glasses and everything is red. So my trauma is like the lens and I'm viewing my present with that past, and that past is constantly pulling my strings in every aspect of my life, whether it is my thoughts, my decisions, my values, how I move, how I talk, how I dress up, everything is attached to those strings. So if it is bothering me, if it is pulling me back to an extent where I'm not able to move forward, it needs to be addressed. So this slide is a good slide. If you want, you can take a screenshot of this as well. It shows how stored emotions manifest in pain. So, if you have in heart where joy and love are, so you will feel constriction there if there is no joy. And if there is in the eyes, if you feel constriction or pain, it's mostly because you have confusion, you don't want to see, anxiety in chest, knots, butterflies in stomach. So basically this is how trauma gets stored and constrict. So it's not expansion, it's constrict. Again, stuck in one part of the nervous system. I want you to watch this video, and I hope we can finish in time. We'll have a few slides left.
In the US, the richest society in history, fully half of the citizens have a chronic disorder such as high blood pressure or diabetes. Anxiety amongst young people is growing rapidly. Asthma and autoimmune diseases are on the rise, as are addictions. Depression is rising. Youth suicide is rising. All is not well.
I started heroin at 26. That's what really destroyed me. It just takes the pain away.
It's easy to want to escape reality completely instead of coping with it.
And so the question is, can we be human beings in the midst of civilization? Because what we call civilization demands the denial of human needs.
Please welcome Dr. Gabor Mate.
Every human being has a true, genuine, authentic self. And the trauma is that disconnection from it, and the healing is the reconnection with it. Why do we get disconnected? Because it's too painful to be ourselves.
So you sort of a bit like in The Matrix when Neo sees everything's made out of numbers. You look at people and you see all their trauma and damage.
That's what I see. So trauma is not the bad things that happen to you, but what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. What do you want to tell me? What comes up right now?
Shame.
Thank you.
My father, he would spank us and take a belt to us.
Who did you speak to about your pain?
Nobody.
Yeah, that's the trauma. In other words, by the time you're 5 years old, you're completely alone. People are much more lonely and isolated than they used to be. Literally, it causes inflammation in the body and suppresses the immune system. You've been diagnosed with prostate cancer.
Correct.
In my view, people that develop cancer have a hard time expressing healthy anger.
Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, there were two traumatized people fighting to govern a traumatized world.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And these are the people that our society rewards with power. Our schools are full of kids with learning difficulties, mental health issues that are trauma-based, but the average teacher never gets a single lecture on trauma. We need trauma-informed medical care, trauma-informed education. If we had a trauma-informed society, we'd have a society that looks much more compassionate.
You did. You made a difference in my life.
Thank you for being in touch.
I don't feel like I'm a bad person anymore. Hey, how are you?
Yeah, I just want people to see the truth. Solutions arise out of people when they confront themselves with the truth, when they're not afraid of the truth.
I think the biggest thing that this whole healing journey has taught me is how to be human.
And that sums it all, what I was trying to tell you all just now. That there is pain, and that pain needs addressal, and healing is possible. So when I say healing from trauma, we talk about relational aspect of trauma because we are relational beings. We heal in relationship. We need that safety of relationship. As I mentioned earlier, we are wired for survival. We are also wired for connection. So if we have safe connections, they are the foundations for our healing. All those connections which help us to stay who we are, allow us to express ourselves authentically without feeling any threat, and also allow us to be and stay connected, love and be loved. That would help us to heal. So will becoming aware about trauma help? It would, to an extent, as I mentioned earlier also, awareness, but would not automatically translate into healing. It would help you to join the dots, but beyond that, to release trauma from the nervous system is the essence of healing. Those aborted survival responses which didn't get completion, those events which didn't get metabolized in your system and is still stuck like a toxic vomit in your body, that needs to come out. Unless they get that release from your system, they are still stuck. Whether you like it or not, they'll sting. Whether you like it or not, they'll pain. And people would wonder, and you would yourself wonder, why am I feeling this? Why am I like this? What happened? I was okay. I don't know why I woke up with this panic attack. I don't know why when everything is going well, I have this anxiety. All these things. So awareness helps to a certain extent, but healing is different from being aware. So trauma healing, release of stuck survival energy from the body, completion of aborted responses, those fight, flight, freeze, all those responses which was like, which started but were not allowed to complete, especially fight and flight, and supporting the regulation of the nervous system back to that normal charge, discharge, that rhythm, that pulsation. If this starts to happen in this frequency, we are supporting the regulation of the nervous system. Again, I want to mention here, when people come for trauma work and healing, they're like, oh my God, are you going to take all the pain away? See, it's desensitization of pain. When we talk about any kind of modality in brain body modalities, EMDR also, it's desensitization of pain. So you would remember the incident, if there is any incident that you remember linguistically, language wise, but you would not have any emotion or activation attached to it. So that would be desensitized. You will have a new meaning from it, but it would also need a release from the system, because unless it is released, there's still some kind of, because sometimes it's you're not even aware of the incidents which happened when I was a baby or when I was in my mother's womb. I do not have any capacity to articulate it in words and give it to my therapist, right? But I have sensations. So we work with those sensations and we help support the regulation of the nervous system. The goal is not to make you flat. The goal is to help you bounce back faster to your baseline. If you have a baseline of your normal nervous system capacity, we help you to bounce back faster. So you're not either stuck when you're depressed, you're not depressed for too long. Of course, you will feel sad. If something bad happens, you will feel sad. We are not numbing you. So if someone says a nasty remark to me, I will feel sad. If someone says, oh, this presentation was too long or too boring or too bad, of course I will feel sad. But I will not stay sad for too long. I will bounce back faster, right? So that's the capacity we are looking for. So this is a short video, very short video, which would help you to understand how those aborted survival responses actually get a release from the body. And this is happening to a polar bear who was tranquilized. And when he's coming back to normalcy and how he can go back in his life in wild when he releases that stress. So that is depicted here. And the same can be done on human beings also. We have next segment dedicated to it, which is trauma release exercise, which would help you to understand how to shake off that trauma. And we have Michelle coming and joining us immediately after my session, and she would be explaining to you about TRE. So I'm just priming you for that. See how these aborted, unfinished survival responses get finished in wild, and that's very natural there. But for us, we try to hold on to it because of so many reasons. We feel we are weak, or people around us start telling us, hey, calm yourself, collect yourself, you're not being in your senses, or you're not being okay, something is wrong with you. So it's the conditioning which holds us back. But if we allow this to happen, I'll tell you, while preparing for this mental wellness festival, we have been working very hard. Karan knows, and it's day in and day out, we've been working about this. My body started releasing trauma. My hands kept shaking. So even if I'm reading a book, even if I'm holding laptop, my left hand is shaking most of the time. And I was like, okay, I'm getting stressed and my body is not used to holding this amount of stress. So it's releasing it. It's doing my job. I am constantly or consciously not doing it, but my body got used to it. So it automatically releases it now. So it's like a pressure cooker. When the steam builds up, there goes the whistle. That's what happens. So let's watch this.
We'll go for that one, Dennis. Here, oh yeah, another pretty big bear. Another 8cc, or do you think, Dennis? See the pads there are sort of like non-skid material, and it's all sort of rough. It's not really smooth. It helps them get better traction on the ice. Opens right up. It's almost like sandpaper. And then, of course, big claws for ripping, breaking into seal layers. But he hasn't started to really chip his teeth. If you watch that animal after he finishes convulsing, you'll see, because he's aware of the fact that we're all around him, and it's a very stressful experience for an animal like a polar bear. After he settles down, and then he'll start doing a couple of deep breaths, and then he'll breathe really nicely, and it'll really... Now go, here he goes. See how he's breathing there now? You can see, so that even though it looks a little unpleasant to look at him convulsing like that, in fact, it lets off all that stress, and he then is able to relax and sleep the thing off.
That was discharging. So you all watched, and I'll not explain that more because we saw how that discharge of survival energy, that stuck energy we saw in that polar bear, and Michelle is going to cover in the next session. So prerequisite for trauma healing is safety. We need that safety of environment, safe space, safe connection, and along with that, trust, consistency, and predictability. Because when trauma happened, it was too fast. My trust was shattered. So now I need more trust, more consistency, where I feel that I won't be abandoned. People would take care of me. I can have connections. I am worthy of connections. And there is some kind of predictability. There's no gaslighting. There is no on and off relationships. I love you. There's no trade in relationship. There is no reciprocity, but there is just love and connection. If that's there and there is some kind of predictability, it becomes the prerequisite for your healing. So what true healing looks like, whether it is complex CPTSD, we call it complex PTSD, relational trauma, and loss of self in order to survive, which happened in childhood, healing actually looks like reclaiming not just our stories, our boundaries, our feelings, our choices, our bodies, and our voice back. That's the most important. If I am allowed to express myself authentically, without any fear, without any threat, that's what real healing looks like. So internal roadblocks to healing, which may or may not show up, but clinical experience shows that most of the time it shows up is shame. It may come in the way of healing. Pride, you did this to me, and now I'm going to show the world that I'm such a great person and I'm going to fight back the world with this. So there is pride in that. Again, it's coming as a trauma response, the hustle culture. I want to do more, I want to do more. Perfectionism, it's a trauma response, but stemming from pride. Numbness, we call it dissociation, we call it zoning out. I zoned out. Oh, sorry. Numbness means I feel flat. I don't feel anything. Splitting is zoning out. I didn't know what happened just now. I was zoned out. Sorry, what did you say? Or I zone out for days. So because the pain is too much for me to bear, my psyche splits, and we call it dissociation. So these may be the roadblocks for healing, but we can work with all of these. So definitely we can work with all of these, and healing is possible. So my hope with this presentation is that you remember to be slow, gentle, and compassionate with yourself in your healing journey. And remember that healing is not a sprint, it is a marathon. So it's a long journey. Be compassionate with yourself. Come from your heart space, tune in to your body. Be compassionate, be curious, and that would definitely go a long way in healing. I'll stop my screen sharing, and I don't know if we have any questions and if we have time for that.